There are objects in a house that were never meant to carry emotion, but over time they do, and the strangest part is that nobody warns you it will happen. It's not always the big things, not always the bed or the wedding ring or the photos on the wall. Sometimes it's something ordinary, something that looks harmless to anyone else, like a chair. The kind of chair you wouldn't even describe if someone asked you what your home looks like. The kind of chair you'd walk past without thinking, except... Now, you don't walk past it the same way, because once a chair becomes the empty chair, it stops being furniture and starts being a sentence you can't finish. At first, it doesn't feel dramatic. That's what makes it cruel in a quiet way. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like routine. You wake up, you move through your morning the way you always have, you make coffee or tea, you set something on the table, and the chair is just there, across from you or beside you, and for a moment you don't even register what is wrong, because the mind is still living inside the old habit, still expecting a voice to answer, still expecting the gentle noise of another life in the room. And then the realization settles in, not with a bang, but with a soft heaviness. It's empty, and it's going. To stay empty today, there are people who think loneliness is always loud, always crying, always breaking down. But many of the loneliest moments are quiet, almost invisible from the outside. You can be dressed, clean, functional, even polite, and still feel like the world has slowly stopped noticing you. The empty chair becomes the most honest witness of that. It doesn't argue with you. It doesn't comfort you. It just sits there, holding the shape of what used to be. And the hardest part is that the chair doesn't look sad. It looks normal. That's why it hurts when you look at it, because it reminds you that absence can wear the face of normal life. Sometimes you sit down and you catch yourself placing things as if someone will reach for them. A second mug, a napkin folded twice, a portion of food that's too large for one person. And when you notice what you did, you don't always cry. Sometimes you just freeze for a second, like your body is embarrassed that it still remembers, embarrassed that love is still doing what love does, which is making space. That's the part people don't talk about. They talk about moving on as if the heart is a machine you can reset. But your heart doesn't forget its patterns just because the world has changed. And the empty chair doesn't only belong to grief. Sometimes it belongs to distance. Sometimes the person is still alive, but they are not present in your life the way they used to be. Sometimes the empty chair is not about a spouse who died. It's about children who don't call, grandkids who don't visit, friends who stopped inviting, neighbors who moved away, a community that got younger and faster while you stayed the same age, in the same house, with the same walls, watching time change everything around you. The chair becomes empty in different ways. It becomes empty when the conversations get shorter. It becomes empty when holidays feel like obligations that everyone rushes through. It becomes empty when the home is full of objects but empty of attention. And here's the truth: nobody says out loud because it sounds bitter, even if it's not meant to be. There are seasons in life when you feel like you are becoming easy to forget. Not because you did something wrong, not because you weren't loved, but because people get busy, and they don't realize that their busy is someone else's silence. They don't realize how a week can feel like a month when you're waiting for the sound of your name. They don't realize how humiliating it feels to hesitate before calling someone, because you don't want to be a burden, because you don't want to beg for attention, because you don't want your existence to feel like an interruption. So you stay quiet. You tell yourself, they'll call when they can, and you say it again the next day, and then the next. The empty chair becomes a mirror for that kind of quiet suffering, because you don't only miss a person, you miss being needed, you miss being considered, you miss being asked, how are you really doing, without the conversation rushing away after the first answer. You miss the simple feeling of being expected. And when you lose that, you start to wonder what you are now. You start to wonder what your place is. You start to wonder if your life is still visible to anyone but you. There are nights when the silence in the house feels almost respectful, like the walls are honoring something sacred that once lived there. And then there are nights when the silence feels like pressure, like it's sitting on your chest, like it's too big for one person to hold. You sit in your living room and the TV is on, but it's not company, it's noise. You look at the chair and you don't even know what you want anymore. You don't always want a solution. Sometimes you want one thing, to be seen, not as a problem, not as a task, not as an obligation, but as a person whose life still matters, whose heart still carries love, whose days still contain meaning even if nobody is watching. If you are listening right now and you recognize that chair, I want you to hear this without rushing past it. You are not weak for feeling the weight of it. You are not too sensitive. You are not dramatic. The empty chair hurts because love was real. The empty chair hurts because presence mattered. The empty chair hurts because your heart is still alive enough to notice absence. And that, even though it aches, is also proof of something precious inside you. You have not turned into stone. You have not become numb. You have not stopped caring. You are still here. And even if the room feels quiet, your life is not meaningless. There is something that happens with loneliness as time passes that almost no one prepares you for. It doesn't stay the same. It changes shape. In the beginning, the empty chair feels like a sharp reminder, something you notice suddenly, something that hurts because it is new. But later, much later, it becomes something else. It becomes familiar. It becomes expected. And that is when it quietly grows heavier. At first, you count days. You remember dates. You tell yourself it's only been a few weeks or it hasn't even been a year yet. Time still has edges, but eventually the edges soften. You stop counting. The calendar pages turn without ceremony, and one day you realize you no longer remember exactly when the chair became empty, only that it has been empty for a long time. That realization can be unsettling in a way that is hard to explain, because forgetting the exact moment doesn't mean you forgot the person. It means the absence has woven itself into your daily life so completely that it no longer announces itself. It's just there when you wake up. It's there when you sit down. It's there when you stand up again. It follows you through the house without moving at all. This is the stage of loneliness that feels the most invisible to the outside world. People assume that if enough time has passed, the pain must be smaller. They assume that quiet means healing. They assume that your silence means acceptance. But often the opposite is true. The longer the chair stays empty, the more carefully you learn to live around it, and the more energy it takes to pretend that nothing is missing. You begin to adapt in ways you never consciously chose. You stop setting extra places at the table. You stop mentioning names in conversation because you don't want to see the discomfort on other people's faces. You learn which memories are too heavy to share and which ones are acceptable in polite conversation. You shrink your grief, not because it has become smaller, but because you have learned it makes others uneasy. And slowly, subtly, the loneliness shifts from being about someone else to being about you. It stops being only about who is gone and starts becoming about who remains, you. Sitting in the same house, waking up in the same body, carrying days that feel quieter than they should. This is when questions start to change. In the beginning, the question is, why did this happen? Later, the question becomes, is this just how my life is now? And that second question can be far more frightening because it suggests permanence. It suggests that the silence is not a season, but a setting. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from long-term loneliness. It's not physical tiredness. It's not something sleep fixes. It's the tiredness of always being the one who notices the quiet, always being the one who fills time with noise, just to avoid hearing your own thoughts echo back at you. It's the tiredness of carrying memories alone, with no one to confirm them or share the weight of remembering. Sometimes, in these moments, you may wonder if your life has become smaller, not in meaning, but in visibility. You are still here. You are still breathing. You are still thinking, feeling, remembering. But fewer people seem to witness it. Fewer people ask. Fewer people pause. And that can create a painful confusion. If no one is watching, does it still count? This is not a selfish question. It is a human one. We were not made to live unseen. We were not designed to carry entire histories alone. When connection fades, something inside us begins to doubt not just our relationships, but our relevance. And that doubt can settle deep, especially when the world moves faster and louder, leaving little room for the quiet lives that don't announce themselves. The empty chair becomes a symbol of this quiet erosion. It is not only a reminder of who is gone, it becomes a reminder of how easily presence can turn into absence, and how absence can slowly turn into invisibility. You may not say it out loud, but you feel it, a sense that your life is continuing in the background, while the main story happens somewhere else, with other people, at other tables. And yet even here, even in this deep and settled loneliness, something important remains true. The fact that you feel this ache means your inner life has not disappeared. The fact that the silence still weighs on you means your heart has not gone numb. The world may have become quieter around you, but inside you, there is still awareness, still longing, still meaning waiting to be acknowledged. This is the part no one rushes to tell you, because it doesn't sound like comfort. But it is truth. Loneliness does not mean your life has lost value. It often means your life has become quieter, and quiet lives are the ones most easily overlooked. Not because they matter less, but because they do not compete for attention. If you are here, listening to this, living with an empty chair that has been empty for longer than you expected, I want you to know that this stage of loneliness is real, and it is heavy, and it deserves to be named. You are not imagining it. You are not failing at moving on. You are living inside a reality that few people talk about honestly. And even though this block is not yet about solutions, not yet about answers, not yet about God spoken clearly, it is about something just as important: recognition. The recognition that long loneliness changes a person, that it reshapes how you see time, how you see yourself, and how you understand your place in the world. You are not strange for feeling this way. You are not broken for noticing the silence more now than you did before. You are responding normally to an extended absence of being seen, and that matters. It matters more than anyone has probably told you. There comes a point in long loneliness when the pain is no longer sharp, but deep, and that depth can be more unsettling than the early days ever were. It is not the kind of pain that makes you cry openly or reach out for help. It is quieter than that. It is the pain of continuing, the pain of waking up and realizing that nothing has changed and that no one seems to be noticing how much effort it takes for you to keep going. By this stage, you have likely learned how to function well enough that the world assumes you are fine. You know how to answer questions without inviting concern. You know how to smile politely without revealing what is underneath. You know how to keep conversations light, even when your inner world feels heavy. And because you have become so capable at carrying this quietly, people stop asking deeper questions. They take your calm as proof that you no longer need care. This is one of the most painful paradoxes of aging and loneliness. The stronger you appear, the less support you receive. The more you endure without complaint, the more invisible your endurance becomes. And so the empty chair remains not only a symbol of absence, but also a symbol of how much of your life is now lived without witness. You may find yourself thinking about how different things feel compared to earlier years. Not because life was perfect then, but because there was a sense of being seen. Someone noticed when you came home. Someone noticed when you were tired. Someone noticed when you were quiet for too long. Now you can pass entire days without anyone truly noticing whether you spoke or not. This kind of invisibility does something subtle to a person. It doesn't erase your identity, but it begins to blur it. You start to wonder which parts of you still matter. You start to question whether your thoughts are still worth sharing, whether your stories still have a place, whether your presence still changes anything in the room. And when those questions go unanswered for long enough, they can begin to feel like statements rather than questions. At this point, many people retreat further inward, not out of bitterness, but out of self-protection. You learn not to expect too much, because expectation can lead to disappointment. You learn to keep your needs small, because asking for more feels risky. You tell yourself that this is simply what life looks like now, that this is the natural narrowing of the world, that this is what happens when years accumulate. But something important must be said here, even if it is uncomfortable. Becoming quieter does not mean becoming less valuable. Losing an audience does not mean losing meaning. The fact that fewer people see you does not mean that there is less to see. The empty chair may suggest absence, but it also tells a story of presence that once existed and presence that still exists in a different form. You are still the same person who loved, who built, who endured, who showed up for others. Those truths do not expire just because fewer people acknowledge them. They do not fade simply because the room is quieter now. There is a tendency, especially in long loneliness, to measure worth by response, by calls returned, by invitations received, by signs of recognition. And when those responses diminish, it can feel as though worth itself is diminishing. But response is not the same as value. Attention is not the same as significance. Silence from others does not equal emptiness within you. This is where many people begin to confuse invisibility with irrelevance. They are not the same. Invisibility is about perception. Irrelevance is about meaning. And meaning does not disappear simply because it is no longer publicly affirmed. Your life does not lose weight just because it is carried more quietly. If you are sitting with an empty chair and a sense that your days are passing without being noticed, I want you to consider this carefully. The quietness of your life may be hiding its depth, not erasing it. There is a richness in lives that are no longer loud. There is wisdom in those who have learned to endure without applause. There is dignity in continuing even when recognition fades. This block is not yet about comfort or reassurance in the usual sense. It is about reframing what has been slowly misinterpreted. Your loneliness may have taught you to believe that you are disappearing. But the truth is more complex than that. You are not disappearing. You are living in a phase of life that the world does not know how to honor well. And that failure of recognition says more about the world than it does about you. There is a moment in long loneliness when a person stops asking to be noticed by others and begins to wonder if anyone sees them at all. Not in the sense of attention or recognition, but in the deeper sense of being known. It is one thing to be overlooked by people who are busy, distracted, or overwhelmed by their own lives. It is another thing entirely to feel as though your existence itself has slipped into the background, as if your life is happening quietly behind a curtain. This is often when the thought of God becomes complicated, not loud, not angry, complicated. You may not doubt God's existence, you may not even doubt God's goodness, but you begin to wonder about God's nearness. You wonder if God sees the empty chair the way you do. You wonder if God notices the long hours, the quiet meals, the days that pass without interruption. You wonder if God understands the kind of loneliness that does not come from drama, but from continuity. Many people expect faith to remove loneliness. They expect belief to fill the chair, but faith does not always work that way. Sometimes faith does not erase the absence. Sometimes it simply sits with you in it. And that can feel disappointing if you were taught that God's presence should always feel obvious, comforting, or immediately reassuring. But consider this carefully. If God only met people in noise, then the quiet would be empty. If God only spoke through crowds, then solitude would be abandoned. And yet throughout history, the most profound encounters with God have often happened in places of silence, waiting, and apparent absence. The empty chair, as painful as it is, may not be a sign that God has stepped away. It may be the place where God has chosen not to rush you, not to distract you, not to overwhelm the quiet with answers that come too quickly. There is a difference between absence and restraint. And sometimes what feels like distance is actually patience. You may have prayed before and felt nothing change. You may have asked for comfort and felt only more awareness of the silence. That does not mean you were unheard. It may mean that the kind of presence being offered is not the kind that replaces loss, but the kind that remains when loss cannot be replaced. God does not always fill the chair. Sometimes God stands beside it. This is difficult to accept because it does not look like rescue. It does not look like intervention. It looks like companionship that respects grief rather than erasing it. It looks like a presence that does not hurry you toward resolution. It looks like someone who understands that love leaves marks, and that removing those marks too quickly would diminish what was real. If you are still sitting with the empty chair and you still feel the ache of it, it may be because your capacity to love has not been taken from you. And God, who understands love more deeply than any human ever could, does not shame that ache. God does not tell you to get over it. God does not demand that you pretend the chair does not matter. God acknowledges it, even if others have stopped seeing it. There is a kind of seeing that does not require words, a kind of presence that does not announce itself. You may not feel surrounded by peace, you may not feel lifted, but you may notice something quieter, that you are not alone with your thoughts, even when no one else is in the room. That the silence, while still heavy, is no longer empty. This is not about pretending the loneliness is good. It is not about spiritualizing pain. It is about recognizing that being seen by God does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels steady. Sometimes it feels unremarkable. Sometimes it feels like survival rather than relief. And yet that steadiness matters, because when everything else fades, what remains is what was never dependent on attention. God's regard does not increase when people notice you, and it does not diminish when they forget. God does not grow distant when the phone stops ringing. God does not step away when the chair stays empty longer than you expected. You may not have the words to describe this kind of presence. That's okay. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to perform faith for it to be real. It is enough to sit, to breathe, to remain, to allow the possibility that even here, even now, you are seen. Not as an obligation, not as a burden, not as someone who used to matter, but as someone who still does. If you have listened this far, it tells me something important about you. It tells me that the empty chair is not just an idea to you. It is part of your life. It sits in your home. It sits in your days. It sits in your thoughts, especially in the quiet moments when there is nothing else demanding your attention. And I want you to know this first, before anything else. You were not wrong to stay. You were not wrong to keep living in this space. You were not wrong to continue showing up to days that feel quieter than they should. There is a quiet courage in continuing, and it often goes unnoticed by the world, but it is not unseen. The world tends to celebrate beginnings and endings. It knows how to mark weddings and funerals, promotions and retirements, arrivals and departures, but it does not know how to honor the long middle. the long stretch of days where nothing dramatic happens, yet everything meaningful is carried. The days where you wake up, sit down, notice the empty chair, and still choose to go on. Those days matter. They matter because they are still your life. They matter because they still contain thought, memory, reflection, and love. Even when no one else is present to witness them, they are not wasted. They are not empty just because a chair is. You may still feel the loneliness after this ends. You may still notice the chair tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. This message was never meant to erase that. It was meant to sit beside you in it, to say what is so rarely said out loud, that the ache you feel is understandable, and that it does not disqualify you from peace, from dignity, or from being held by something greater than human attention. God does not rush this kind of loneliness. God does not shame it. God does not measure your worth by how many people show up, how often your phone rings, or how visible your life looks from the outside. God sees you in the long hours. God sees you in the quiet meals. God sees you in the nights when the silence feels heavier than the day. And God does not turn away. If all you can do today is sit, that is enough. If all you can do is breathe and listen, that is enough. You do not need to resolve anything. You do not need to be stronger. You do not need to make sense of it all. Presence is enough for now. Before this video ends, I want to invite you to do something very simple if you feel able. You don't have to explain your story. You don't have to write something long. You don't have to say anything profound. You can leave just one word in the comments, or one short sentence, even something as simple as, "I'm here." Those words matter, not for the algorithm, for you, and for the others who will read them and realize they are not as alone as they thought. If you would like to stay, you are welcome here. More messages like this are coming. Messages meant for quiet moments. Messages meant to keep you company. Messages meant to remind you that your life still has weight, still has meaning, still has a place. And as we end, let me say this gently and without hurry. God bless your life. God be with you in the quiet. And when you feel alone, remember this. You are seen. You are not forgotten. And you still matter.